What a fun crowd. They just told me it was Saturday. So what a fun crowd for Saturday night. We're so thrilled that y'all could be here in Cedar Rapids. It's hard to believe we are 16 days to caucus. And that means it's go time. And so as we are going across all of Iowa, trying to remind everybody how important this is, we want to thank you for taking the time to come here. We just finished watching the Lady Hawkeyes play. I mean, you know I'm a big fan of strong girls. But I got to tell you, your coach is a rock star. She really is. She's amazing. I was saying earlier, I've always loved basketball, ladies basketball, men's basketball, because my son, I mean, literally grew up with a basketball in his hand. So I was a basketball mom. And I was that mom. I was the loud one. I was the one that cheered a lot. I was the one that did everything. And we were laughing about, my son's with me, we were laughing about a story earlier. I think he was in like 4th or 5th grade. And he was up there and he was doing his free throws. And he had done the first free throw. And you know how it gets all quiet when the free throws. And I was like, you got this, Nayland. And he's bouncing the ball. And he stopped and he held it and he goes, Mom. I felt that small. I mean, that small. But yes, I was that basketball mom. So it was fun being at the game. That was like the highlight of my week, so it was a lot of fun to be there. How many of you are hearing me speak at a town hall for the first time? Oh, wow. Where have y'all been? Welcome to the party. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, then we'll talk about what's going on in the country, and then we'll talk about how to save her. I was born and raised in a small rural town in South Carolina. 2,500 people, 2 stoplights. You couldn't think about doing something wrong without somebody already telling your mom. I grew up playing between a cotton field and a dairy farm. My mom started a business out of the living room of her home. 30 plus years later, it was a successful company. I started doing the books for the family business when I was 13. It wasn't until I got to college that I realized that was child labor. I went on, I'm not an Ivy Leaguer, I went to a public university, I went to Clemson University, go Tigers, graduated with a degree in accounting. I'm an accountant, accountants are problem solvers. And then I went and worked in the corporate world. And I came back home to the family business. And one day I happened to be sitting with my mom, telling her how hard it was to make a dollar and how easy it was for government to take it. And my mom said, don't complain about it, do something about it. I truly did not know that you weren't supposed to run against a 30-year incumbent in a primary. Ignorance is bliss. I had never been politically active. Once I realized he was related to half the district, the only option was to win. So I went around the district and said, we have way too many lawyers at the State House. I think they need a really good accountant. And the district took a chance on me, and we won. And when I got to the State House, my focus was mainly on helping small businesses. I have always believed small businesses are the heartbeat of our economy, and we have to take care of them. So for 3 to 4 years, that's what I was focused on. And in South Carolina, legislation is typically passed, bless you, by a voice vote. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. But one day, they pushed through a bill that would give legislators a pay raise. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, silence. The ayes have it. Yet to this day, you can't find anyone that says they voted themselves a pay raise. I was furious because we had a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican governor. And so I filed a bill that said anything important enough to be debated on the floor of the House or the Senate is important enough for people to know how their legislators voted. And the Speaker of the House said, put the bill away. We don't need to have it. We will decide what the public needs to see and what they don't. Long story short, when I refused to put the bill away, when I went around the state of South Carolina telling them what was going on with the voice votes, they stripped me of everything. I lost all my seniority. I was demoted off of all of my committees. I could take the well, no one would hear me speak. I could sponsor a bill, no one would co-sponsor. So I ran for governor. And I'm proud to say one of the first bills we signed into law is now in South Carolina. Anything important enough to be debated on the floor of the House or the Senate requires a legislative vote on the record, and we took it a step further and did it on every section of the budget. And I love music. You were listening to my playlist earlier. I hope you enjoyed it. But on that day, we blasted throughout the State House, Pat Benatar's Hit Me With Your Best Shot. When I became governor, South Carolina was hurting. We had 11% unemployment. We had thousands of people on welfare. And South Carolina was the butt of the jokes. And we got to work. By the time I left, we were building planes with Boeing. We were building more BMWs than any place in the world. We brought in Mercedes-Benz. We brought in Volvo, 5 international tire companies. They were referring to South Carolina as the beast of the Southeast, which I still love. We announced jobs in every county in the state. We moved the unemployment number from 11% down to 4%. And we acknowledged some truths. We said, if you've got to show picture ID to buy Sudafed, you have to show picture ID to get on a plane. You should have to show picture ID to protect the integrity of the election process. And we passed voter ID in South Carolina. We passed one of the toughest illegal immigration laws in the country. We passed tort reform. We did pension reform. We cut taxes for small businesses and veterans. We built up our coffers. We paid down our debt. And South Carolina was proud. And by the time I left, we were named the friendliest state in the country, the most patriotic state in the country, and the #2 state in the country people were moving to. And then I got the call for the United Nations. And my honest answer was, I don't even know what the UN does. I just know everybody hates it. And I wasn't wrong about that. But when I got there, I wanted countries to know what America was for and what America was against. I didn't care if they didn't like me, but I wanted them to respect America. And we got to work. We pulled ourselves out of the Iran deal. We moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I pushed China to pass the largest set of sanctions against North Korea and stop them from testing ballistic missiles. We got ourselves out of the farce that was the Human Rights Council. We pulled ourselves out of the Paris Climate Agreement. We made sure no taxpayer dollars were going to the Palestinian Refugee Organization anymore. And we cut $1 billion right off the top. But the best thing about what we did at the United Nations, we took the kick me sign off of our backs. And America was respected again at the UN. And now I'm running for president. Woo, woo! And guys, I think that means we've got some caucus people, so make sure you grab them. I don't need to tell you how bad things are. You don't have to turn on the news to see it. You feel it when you go to the grocery store. You feel it when you go to the gas station. You feel it with your mortgage payment, your insurance payment, everything that we have to pay. It's all gone up. And I would love to tell you that Biden did that to us. And Biden has sent us down this roller coaster of socialism that's dangerous, that has to stop. But I have always spoken in hard truths. And I'm going to do that with you tonight. Our Republicans did that to us too. You go back and look at that $2.2 trillion COVID stimulus bill that they passed with no accountability. They expanded welfare that has now left us with over 80 million Americans on Medicaid, 42 million Americans on food stamps. That's a third of our country. And did Republicans try and make it right? No. They doubled down and opened up earmarks and pet projects for the first time in 10 years, pushing through 7,000 of them last year. Want to know how they spent your money? $30 million on an honors college in Vermont, $10 million to tear down a hotel in Alaska, $7.5 million on a courthouse in Colorado, and the list goes on. In the 2024 appropriations budget, Republicans put in $7.4 billion worth of pet projects and earmarks. Democrats put in $2.8 billion. Now you tell me who the big spenders are. $34 trillion in debt. We're having to borrow money just to make our interest payments. China owns some of that debt. All while 1 in 6 American families can't pay their utility bill. 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 50% of American families can't afford diapers. Homelessness is up 12%. Over 650,000 Americans are homeless. Social Security will go bankrupt in 10 years. Medicare will go bankrupt in 8. Then you look at our education system. Everybody wants to blame COVID for our education system. Nope, we had problems with education before COVID. Do you know right now in America, only 31% of 8th graders in our country are proficient in reading? 31%. Only 27% of 8th graders are proficient in math. If we don't do something and do something quick, we're going to be in a world of hurt 10 years from now. And then you look at the border. I truly have no more things to say about how awful that is and how I can't believe in this day and time in America we're allowing that to happen. It is a complete dereliction of duty. And I've been to the border. I didn't pull a Kamala, go and come back. I went 400 miles down that border. You're not ready for what I saw. Mounds of shoes, mounds of clothes, paraphernalia, rape areas that the women and girls had to walk through. When you get up in the morning, you get your coffee and you watch the news. When these ranchers get up in the morning, they get their coffee and they go see if anybody died crossing the fence. They pick up whatever little kids were left behind and turn them over to Border Patrol. I met with multiple sheriffs. They said before 7 a.m. they round up whatever illegal immigrants they can find. They turn them over to Border Patrol. Border Patrol documents them and releases them until their court date years from now. And when I asked Border Patrol about their job, they said, "You want to know what we do? We're glorified babysitters. They don't let us do our job." 8 million illegal immigrants have come to that border. 275,000 this December. Last month, 17 people from the terrorist watch list. We had enough fentanyl cross the border last year that would kill every single American. #1 cause of death for adults 18 to 45, fentanyl. And don't think for a second China doesn't know what they're doing when they send it over. And then my parents always taught me, you take care of those who take care of you. But I'm going to ask you if we're taking care of those who take care of us. Right now in America, over 35,000 of our veterans are homeless. 1 in 3 suffers from PTSD or thoughts of suicide. We lose 22 heroes a day to suicide. If a veteran wants a doctor's appointment, on average, it takes 29 days. Why 29 days? Because on the 30th day, they can go to the doctor or hospital of their choice. So midway through the 29 days, they get a call to reschedule. And the clock starts all over again. It is shameful how we treat our veterans. And then you turn on the TV and you see the hot mess that is in D.C. What has Congress done for you lately? Nothing. Congress has one job: to put together a budget on time to pay for government. Do you know Congress has only given a budget on time 4 times in 40 years? 4 times in 40 years. You know what I say to that? No budget, no pay.
Yes.
We have to hold them accountable. Don't you think it's time we finally have term limits in Washington, D.C.? Don't you think we need to have mental competency tests for anyone over the age of 75? And let me say this, I'm not being disrespectful when I say that. We all know people over the age of 75 that can run circles around us. And then there's Joe Biden. Congress has become the most privileged nursing home in the country. These are people making decisions on our national security. These are people making decisions on the future of our economy. That's nothing to play with. We need to know we've got people at the top of their game. I don't care if you do it for people 50 and up. But we need to know that they're not staying so long they don't know what it is that they're doing. So that's a lot of bad, right? It's hard to find anything good. But now I'm going to tell you what I told South Carolinians when I became governor. No more whining. No more complaining. Now we get to work. How do we save her? Let's start with the economy. The first thing we do is we start by clawing back to over $100 billion of unspent COVID dollars still sitting out there. Instead of 87,000 IRS agents going after middle America, go after the hundreds of billions of dollars of COVID fraud. 1 out of every $7 was spent fraudulently. If 8% of our budget is interest, quit borrowing. Cut up the credit cards. You have to balance the budget every day. I had to balance the budget as governor. Why is Congress the only group that refuses to balance the budget? We'll stop the spending, we'll stop the borrowing, we'll eliminate the earmarks, and I will veto any spending bill that doesn't take us back to pre-COVID levels. That will save us trillions. Then we will go and take as many federal programs as we can and send them down to the states. That will reduce the size of the federal government, but it empowers people on the ground. Think welfare, think healthcare, think education. Do you know right now, 70% of federal employees are still working from home 3 years after COVID? Do you know 75% of most of our agencies are still sitting empty? We're paying for that. This needs to be cleaned up. And then we need to let the middle class breathe. We're losing them. We're watching the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. If we're going to let the middle class breathe, what we want to do is the first thing, eliminate the federal gas and diesel tax in this country. Cut taxes on the middle class and simplify those brackets. And make small business tax cuts permanent. They made corporate tax cuts permanent. They made small business tax cuts temporary. If they are the heartbeat of our economy, treat them like it. That's why we need to make those tax cuts permanent. Once we stop the spending of more than we make, and we start seriously paying down debt, and we start getting our economy back on track, that's when we'll be able to breathe again. And when it comes to education, we knew in South Carolina if a child couldn't read by 3rd grade, they were 4 times less likely to graduate high school. So we started holding our kids back instead of sending them forward. We brought in their parents, we did reading remediation programs, and we set them up for success. We've got to do that all over this country. We have got to get our kids reading again. And no parent should ever wonder what's being said or taught to their child in class. Transparency in the classroom, and they need to be putting all of the curriculum online for every parent to see. As parents, we have one job, and that's to make sure we do right by our kids. And that's why every parent should be able to decide where their child goes to school and what mode of education they get. Every child deserves a good education, regardless of where they're born and raised. We have to stop mandating education based on a zip code. And then let's build things in America again. Let's put vocational classes back into our high schools. In South Carolina, we had apprenticeships all over our state. We taught our kids how to build the things we were making. That got them invested in our economy before they even finished school. That's what we need to get back to. And as a point of personal privilege, and with every girl dad out there, and every strong mom that's in this room, we have to raise strong girls. Strong girls become strong women, and strong women become strong leaders. And none of that happens if you have biological boys playing in girls' sports. We have got to know. And then when it comes to the border, we will take what I did in South Carolina and we'll go national with it. We'll do a national E-Verify program where every business has to prove that the people they hire are in this country legally. We will defund sanctuary cities once and for all. No more safe havens for illegal immigrants. We're going to put 25,000 Border Patrol and ICE agents on the ground and let them do their job. We will go back to the Remain in Mexico policy, so they never even step foot on U.S. soil. And instead of catch and release, we'll go to catch and deport. That is what will stop what's happening at the border. And when it comes to our veterans, we have all seen the images when our men and women deploy and the tears that are shed. And then we've seen the images when our men and women come back home to us and the prayers that are answered. I'm the wife of a combat veteran. My husband deployed to Afghanistan. And the day he came back home to us, that was a lot of prayers answered. But that was the easy part. When we got home, life got hard. Michael couldn't hear loud noises. He couldn't be in crowds. Life had passed him by for the year that he was gone, and the transition was tough. We can't just love our men and women when they're gone. We gotta love them when they come back home too. 2 weeks of a transition is not enough. You have to keep checking on them to make sure they're okay. We need to have telehealth so that they get the mental health care they need right when they need it. They should be able to go to the doctor or hospital of their choice. They've earned that right. And I think when it comes to taking care of veterans' health care, the best way to deal with it is I think every member of Congress should have to get their health care from the VA, and you watch how fast. It'll be the best health care you've ever seen. Guaranteed, guaranteed. And there were 2 things when I was at the United Nations that Russia, China, and Iran never wanted us to have. They never wanted us to have a strong military. And they never wanted us to be energy independent. We won't be energy independent. We will be energy dominant. We will get the EPA out of the way. Right now they care more about sagebrush lizards than they do about whether we can afford our utility bill. We will speed up the permitting. We will speed up our pipelines. We'll go back to the Keystone Pipeline. We'll export as much liquefied natural gas as we can. We will, yes, support biofuels and every sort of energy. We won't do enough just to survive. Let's turn it into the economic powerhouse we know it to be. Let's export it out to the world. That's the job of a president, is to use it so that we can actually build our economy in the process. We'll support the renewable fuel standard, and we will make sure no more going hat in hand to Saudi Arabia. No more getting dirty oil from Iran and Venezuela. So that's the domestic side of things. Now let's talk about national security. The world is on fire. Literally. You've got a war in Europe. You've got a war in the Middle East. North Korea just tested an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of hitting the U.S. You've got China on the march. But make no mistake, none of that would have happened had we not had that debacle in Afghanistan. The idea that my husband and his military brothers and sisters had to watch us leave Bagram Air Force Base in the middle of the night without telling our allies who stood shoulder to shoulder with us for decades because we asked them to be there. Think about what that told our friends. More importantly, think about what that said to our enemies. And now, right now, Congress is asking you and debating in D.C., do we support Ukraine or do we support Israel? Do we support Israel or do we secure the border? Don't let them lie to you like that. It is completely wrong and they know it. That's a false premise. Let's take it one at a time. Let's start with Ukraine. You should know, when I was at the United Nations, Ukraine was an amazing friend to us. They voted with us on almost everything. They supported almost every initiative without me even asking. Here you have this pro-American, freedom-loving country that was invaded by a thug. 500,000 people have died and been wounded because of Putin. Now, I don't think we should ever give any country cash, friend or foe, because you can't follow it, you don't know how it's being spent. I don't think we need to put troops on the ground in Ukraine. Ukrainians don't want it. They want to win this on their own. But I think we need to give them the equipment and ammunition to win. Now, if you are one of those people who has asked, why do we bother helping Ukraine? Why should we help Ukraine? That's a legitimate question for you to ask. And I would totally understand you asking that. And you deserve an answer. But no one has given you an answer, so I'm going to give you an answer. The reason we care about Ukraine, and I saw this every day at the United Nations, terrorists, thugs, and dictators always tell us what they're going to do. They are amazingly transparent. Hamas said they were going to move into Israel. They did. China said they were going to take Hong Kong. Happened during COVID. Russia said they were going to invade Ukraine. We watched it. China said Taiwan is next. We better believe them. Russia said once they take Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. Those are NATO countries. And then America is at war. This is about preventing war. It's always been about preventing war. And we know Putin has hit rock bottom. How do we know that? He's lost 87% of his military forces that started the war. They've raised the draft age in Russia to 65. They're getting drones from Iran and missiles from North Korea. Putin knows he's in trouble. Now, if we support Ukraine, that's only 3.5% of our defense budget. That's it, 3.5%. The Europeans have put in more than that, and they should. It's their neighborhood. Now let's go to Israel. I'm haunted by what happened on October 7th. And the reason I'm haunted is because I gave a speech 5 years ago to the entire world at the UN and told them that we knew there were maps. And these maps were held by Hamas. And it showed if they could break through the barrier, this is how they were going to kill as many Jews as fast as they could. And it happened. Now, for anybody that says, why should we care about Israel? God help us if we don't get this right. Israel is a bright spot in a tough neighborhood. They are the tip of the spear when it comes to defeating terrorism. It has never been that Israel needs America. It has always been that America needs Israel. And you look at what happened on that horrific day. When they beheaded those people and burned those babies alive and took those girls out of that concert, raped those girls, and dragged their naked bodies through the streets of Gaza, what did they say? Death to Israel, death to America. That's why it matters. And the other candidates say this is Israel's issue. This should be personal to us. 33 Americans were butchered on that day. They are still holding American hostages. Remember when I told you Putin hit rock bottom? That horrific day, October 7th, is Putin's birthday. Who's the happiest person in the world right now? Putin. Why? Because everybody was paying attention to Ukraine. And on October 7th, what did we all do? Started looking at Israel. Putin didn't call Netanyahu in Israel for 10 days. You know who he called right away? Hamas. Invited them to Russia. They came right over there. They held hands and said they were friends. If we support Ukraine and we support Israel, that's only 5% of our defense budget. Now, when it comes to securing the border, southern border and northern border, that is our #1 priority. You have to keep Americans safe. Right now, America's acting like it's September 10th. We better remember what September 12th felt like. It only takes one person for a 9/11 moment. So there are no excuses to not secure the border. So if we support Ukraine, and we support Israel, and we secure the border, that's less than 20% of Biden's green subsidies. So don't let them tell you that you have to pick. You don't have to pick anything. They have to choose national security. They have to choose keeping Americans safe. They have to choose preventing war. That's their job. This is about priorities. And national security is always our top priority. Now, prior to Russia invading Ukraine, right before the Olympics, Russia and China, Putin and Xi, held hands in front of the eyes of the world, and said they were unlimited partners. So let's talk about our #1 national security threat. China has been planning war with us for years, and that's no exaggeration. They're already here. They've already infiltrated our country. They bought 400,000 acres of U.S. soil, most recently near Grand Forks Air Force Base, where our most sensitive drone technology is. They bought the largest pork producer in our country, right here in Iowa. They're spending millions of dollars into our universities, stealing our research and spreading Chinese propaganda. There are certain technologies that allow China to build up their military that threaten America. And the Biden administration approved 70% of it last year. The Trump administration approved even more than that. We've had more Americans die of fentanyl than the Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam wars combined. We lost 75,000 Americans last year alone. Everybody got upset about the Chinese spy balloon, right? Rightfully so. You should have been upset. China told Biden it was a weather balloon. But what we know now is, when that balloon was going over the United States, it was connecting to a U.S. internet company and picked up all the surveillance that it wanted as it went over. Now, South Carolina has beautiful beaches, but that's not why that spy balloon went over there. We were a huge military state. But what about the fact that 90% of our law enforcement drones are Chinese? So think about all the mini surveillance that's happening right now. And then China is building up its military at a scary pace. They now have 500 nuclear warheads. That's 100 more than they had last year. They have the largest naval fleet in the world. They have 370 ships. They'll have 400 ships in 2 years. We won't even have 350 ships in 2 decades. They're doing artificial intelligence. They're doing cyber. They're doing space. They've developed hypersonic missiles. We've barely gotten started. And now China's the lead developer of neurostrike weapons. Weapons engineered to change the brain activity of military commanders and segments of the population. That's who we're dealing with. So whenever Biden and Yellen say that China's a competitor, I dealt with China every single day that I was at the United Nations. They never saw us as a competitor. They always saw us as an enemy. We have to start looking at them the way they look at us. So how do we deal with China? The first thing we do, stop selling any U.S. land to them and take back the land they've already purchased. We go to our universities and we say, you either take foreign money or you take American money, but the days of taking both are over, and we get that foreign infiltration out of our universities. We go and blacklist every bit of technology that helps China and hurts America. We close up all of these Chinese police stations they have throughout our country. And we tell China, we're going to end all normal trade relations with you until you stop murdering Americans with fentanyl. You watch how fast they move. They need our economy. And speaking of economy, Iowa's economy is tied to China. There's a lot of trade there, especially agricultural. We don't wait for China to pull the rug out from under us. It is the job of a president to make sure that doesn't happen. So we need to start building our relationships with our friends. India, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, the Philippines. And go and make sure we move that trade over and then some to our friends. India just gave themselves $1 billion stimulus to become less dependent on China. Japan turned around and followed suit. Now is our time to move that trade over. And then we build up our military. Strong militaries don't start wars. Strong militaries prevent wars. And that doesn't mean throwing a bunch of money to the Department of Defense. It means cleaning it up. Get rid of the bureaucracy. Get rid of the red tape. Get rid of the programs they have no business doing. If it is not strengthening, training, and getting us ready with our military, we shouldn't be doing it. For goodness sake, they have got to stop these gender pronoun classes. It is demoralizing our military. And we have too many generals that look to the past. They're looking at wars of the past, where it was land, air, and sea. We've got to modernize. We got to look to the future. We need to be focused on artificial intelligence, on cyber, on space, on hypersonic missiles, on submarines. Those are the things that we need to zone in on. And when we do that, that's when the world will know we're back. And that's what puts our enemies on their heels. We tell them what we expect of them. Not being reactionary like what Biden's doing or putting his head in the sand. So to connect the dots, there's a reason the Taiwanese want the U.S. and the West to support Ukraine. Because they know if Ukraine wins, China won't invade Taiwan. There's a reason the Ukrainians want the U.S. and the West to support Israel. Because they know if Iran wins, Russia wins. Right now, there's an unholy alliance with China, Russia, and Iran. They are bound together in their hatred of freedom and democracy, and above all things, the United States of America. And we can take them on, but you don't take them on by running in a corner. You don't take them on by acting like they're going to go away on their own. America can never be so arrogant to think we don't need friends. On September 12th, we needed a lot of friends. But you got to be a friend to get a friend. So now that we've talked about domestic policy and national security policy, we have the answers. But the one thing we'll have to do first is stop this national self-loathing that has taken over our country. The idea that they say America's bad, or rotten, or racist. I was elected the first female minority governor in history. America's not racist, we're blessed. Our kids need to know to love America. They need to be saying the Pledge of Allegiance when they start school every day. You know, 6 months ago, I dropped my husband Michael off at 4 a.m. for another year-long deployment. And I watched him and 230 soldiers pick up their 2 duffel bags of belongings to go to a country they'd never been, all in the name of protecting America. They're willing to sacrifice their lives and their families because they still believe in this amazing experiment that is America. So if they're willing to sacrifice for us there, shouldn't we be willing to fight for America here? Because we have a country to save. But in order to save her, we've got to acknowledge some hard truths. Republicans have lost the last 7 out of 8 popular votes for president. That is nothing to be proud of. We should want to win the majority of Americans. But the only way we're going to win the majority of Americans is if we have a new generational leader that leaves behind the negativity and the baggage of the past and looks towards the solutions of the future. Another hard truth. I think President Trump was the right president at the right time. I agreed with a lot of his policies. But rightly or wrongly, chaos follows him. You know I'm right. Chaos follows him. And we can't be a country in disarray away and have a world on fire and go through 4 more years of chaos. You don't fix Democrat chaos, you Republican chaos. And a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for President Kamala Harris. And we can't have another nail-biter of an election in November. You look at the polls, head-to-head. There's plenty of them to look at. Trump and Biden are pretty much even. On a good day, he'll be up 2 points. Wall Street Journal had him up by 4. That's margin of error. I am in every single one of those polls. Head-to-head, Wall Street Journal, I defeat Biden by 17 points. That means it's so much more than the presidency. That's governorships, that's House, that's Senate, that's down to the school board. A double-digit win like that is a mandate to get our economy back on track and stop this ridiculous spending. A mandate to make sure our kids are reading again and go back to the basics in education. A mandate to secure our border with no more excuses. And a mandate to get law and order back to our country. A double-digit win is a mandate for a strong country that we can be proud of. What this is about. Don't you want that? Yeah. But in order to have that, it's going to take a lot of courage. Courage from every single person in this room. Courage for me to run. And courage for every one of you to know. Don't complain about what happens in a general election if you don't play in this caucus, because it matters. When I announced, someone asked me why I was doing this. And I said, you know, my parents came here 50 years ago to an America that was strong and proud and full of possibilities. I want them to know that country again. I'm doing this for my husband Michael and his military brothers and sisters. They need to know their sacrifice matters. They need to know that we love our country. I'm doing this for my daughter who just got married. And I saw how hard it was for her and her husband to buy a home. The average home buyer today is 49 years old. The American dream's getting harder and harder. And I'm doing this for my son because I am tired. He's a senior in college. I am tired of watching him write papers of things he doesn't believe in just to get an A. That's not us. That's not America. For the first time, 81% of Americans don't think their kids are going to live as good of a life as we did. We can't be okay with that. I'm not okay with that. We do have a country to save. But I'll promise you this. If you will join me in this movement, if you will join me in this fight, I promise you, our best days are yet to come. Thank you very much. God bless you. Done over 150 of these town halls. And my friends in the traveling press back there, who, God bless them, have had to go through this with me, can vouch for the fact that during these town halls, I don't talk about my opponents. Because I don't think you want to hear about it. I think you want to hear solutions and how we're going to get our country back on track. Don't clap for me yet. Because now we are 16 days until the caucus. And I see what you're seeing on TV. And I read everything that you're reading. And now I have to speak up. So let's start with Ron DeSantis. Ron has spent millions of dollars on commercials against me. There hasn't been one honest ad he's put up on the air. And don't take my word for it. Everybody from Newsmax to CNN has called him out for it. President Trump is giving me some attention these days. I appreciate that because I know that means he's seeing what we're seeing. And he just went on a temper tantrum yesterday. He probably did another one today, listing all these things about me. Not one of them was true. Not one. I looked, just like one, nothing. So if they're going to lie about me, I'm going to tell you the truth about them. Ron DeSantis was one of the people that increased the debt that we are now having to deal with. Ron DeSantis authored, pushed to ban the renewable fuel standard. You can ask him about that. He banned offshore drilling. He banned fracking. And the Sierra Club loves him. And there's proof of that. President Trump is using a lie that Ron used, and he had to pull it down because it wasn't true. He's saying that I voted to raise taxes in South Carolina. I never voted or pushed to raise any tax in South Carolina. I killed any tax increase that ever came my way. I think government has way too much money. The last thing I will ever do is go to you and tell you to give it more. Not only that, President Trump proposed raising the gas tax by 25 cents on all of us back in 2018. Now, everybody's talking about what a good economy we had under Trump. It's true, right? At what cost? He put us $8 trillion in debt in just 4 years. Our kids will never forgive us for that. And now we're actually going to be paying, 2 years from now, we're going to be paying more in interest payments on that debt than we will have in our defense budget. And don't think Russia, China, and Iran haven't seen every bit of that. If you're going to fix the economy, you don't do it by going more in debt. You do it by doing the things the right way. So I'm done talking about them now. So now we will open it up for questions. We should have, do we have 2 mics? We've got 2 mics, 2 guys. If you hold up your hand, they will come find you, and we will answer what you got. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
He won't give it to you because he thinks you're going to run off with it.
I would like you to elaborate on your term limits. We have 2 great senators. We have 4 great representatives, and I would love to see them continue as long as they're able to do so.
Well, I always think that people have the final say. And you do have a great delegate. Y'all grown strong here tonight. You really do, and you should be proud of that. But this is the thing. I think that term limits are important. So my way of dealing with it, because Congress doesn't want to vote on it anyway, right? My way of dealing with it is there will be a Haley term limits pledge. That every person who's running for office in D.C. has to either sign or not sign, whether they're an incumbent or someone new running. And I'm going to give you all of that information. So you know to ask them, either why didn't you sign the term limit pledge, or why did you sign the term limit pledge? And by the time we get enough people who sign the term limit pledge in Congress, then that's when at least they'll take an up or down vote on it. So I'm going to give you that information. At the end of the day, you're always going to be in control. But I think you deserve to know, when somebody decides to run for office, do they believe in term limits or not? And then we'll just be transparent with it and give it back to you. Yes, ma'am.
building was underwater, right? We had a major flood in here. This year, my house insurance went up $1,000, right? 67%. My sister out in California, her house insurance went up $2,000, 100%, right? Plus the cost of all of these disasters. Do you have any ideas about what to do about individuals paying with house insurance and also the cost of the federal government, FEMA, and things like that?
Well, I'll tell you that our house just flooded a couple weeks ago in South Carolina. And on top of that, our insurance has gone up, and scary how much it's going up. And for many people, they're saying they're not going to give them insurance anymore. So it's causing another issue there. When it comes to FEMA, so in South Carolina, we had our share of crises. We had a school shooting, we had a church shooting, we had an unarmed black man shot 7 times in the back by a dirty cop. But we had a 1,000-year flood. We had multiple hurricanes. And so we were always dealing with this. And what I'll tell you is, there's a lot of money that goes into FEMA. And so FEMA would show up in South Carolina. And they would go and they would put hundreds of people on the ground in these buildings. And I would always be on the ground when these things happened. And what I saw is, when these people would come through after they lost everything, FEMA would go and say, we'll take down your information. And they take it down, and the number of people they come back and say, you're not qualified. Or the number of people they come back with and say, we'll give you $200 or $250 when people have lost everything. We have to go back and see exactly what's happening. They associate themselves with a couple of organizations that are supposed to help. The problem I have, I told you I grew up in a rural challenged area. All of these organizations that do great work, these are their money makers. They wait for a disaster because then they go on TV and say, give this organization money, give that organization money. The problem I had is none of those organizations would go to my rural challenged areas. They would always go to the big wealthy areas that didn't need as much help. So when it comes to FEMA and disaster recovery and all of that, I think we spend a whole lot of money and we don't get anything in return. At the end of the day, if someone loses their property or gets flooded, or when we had the 1,000-year flood, literally we woke up and most of South Carolina was underwater. And in that case, there was mold on people's homes. And so we were trying to get flood buckets, which were the bleach to try and get, because people thought if they just wiped it down, it was gone, and it's not. You can get terribly sick from it. We couldn't get anybody to take flood buckets even to the rural challenged areas. So I started on my own a private organization that I had one of the people in my state coordinate that went and rebuilt the homes of these people in these rural challenged areas that had no insurance. So yes, we do need to do something. I don't know exactly what the answer of that is, but I know that there are parts of disaster recovery that if we took that same money and focused on how to really lift people up when they go through that process, it would be a whole lot better than what I saw multiple times in South Carolina, which is a lot of people spent a lot of time and hours waiting in line to give their information and didn't get a whole lot to show for it at the end of it. Yes, sir.
First of all, thanks for coming. I thought you did a great job, and I'm behind you 100%.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
Lots of talk lately about AI. What's your thought on regulating AI and just anything past that?
No, it's artificial intelligence. The thing about artificial intelligence is many people are either gung-ho on it or they're scared of it. And the answer is you should be a little bit of both, right? So the scary part is, if it gets out of hand, it can really open a door that we don't want to open. But the opportunities of what it gives us in healthcare, in technology, in innovation are huge. So the last thing I want to see is another regulatory agency that passes these regs, that get old, that causes this clutter. I don't want that, because I think government breaks more than it fixes. What I think we should do is just pass laws on a few things about AI. If you go and use it to take someone's personal information, that should be against the law. If you go and use it in any way to hurt democracy or the election process, that should be against the law. If you go and use it in the military without a military officer's sign-off, that should be against the law. If you go and use it to cause harm to someone's health through a hospital setting, that should be against the law. If we just had 4 or 5 laws that kept the bad things from happening, you don't need to get into this regulatory mess because I think too much innovation can come from it. And when I told you we needed artificial intelligence in our military, it can really do some good things. So I don't want us going and necessarily copying the Europeans or copying anybody else on what they think the regs are. Let's just pass laws that would do anything that would harm any individual. And then let the rest of it do what it needs to do. I think that's the best way to deal with it. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I am enthused by your discussion about increasing the strength of our military, increasing the strength of our schools, a lot of the vocational programs. I like all the things you've said about fiscal responsibility. What I haven't heard you clearly articulate is how we're going to pay for that. We have a lot of people that don't pay their fair share today. How are we going to come up with the money to pay down that debt and do these wonderful things?
So first of all, a few things. When you look at those type things, remember when I said we're going to take federal programs and move it down to the state level? If you just look at education, if you can move, and you can move K through 12 down to the state level, if you do that, it cuts the strings that are attached, and a state can tailor, right? So vocational classes in Iowa would be very different than vocational classes in South Carolina, and that's how it should be. But I'll give you a further thing. What I saw as governor, presidents typically meet with their governors once a year. I will meet with our governors once a quarter, Republican and Democrat, with the sole focus of showing them when we move those down and we reduce the size of the federal government, the amount of money we'll save reducing the bureaucracy in the federal government is going to be huge. When we do that, making sure they know the best ways to use those resources. So I'll give you 2 examples. In South Carolina, I told you we had thousands of people on welfare. And a lot of times, these were generational welfare recipients. Their parents had been on welfare, their grandparents had been on welfare, very much like what you're talking about, where people weren't doing their part. And so I matched up these welfare recipients with businesses. And I said, if you will take this person and train them for X number of weeks, I'll pay for it. It's the same amount of time they'd be sitting on the couch. And what I told that business was, at the end of it, you decide if you want to hire them. We moved 35,000 people from welfare to work. We did family celebrations because for the first time, these people felt productive. They had value. They wanted to do it. They never knew how to get the training. We had to connect the dots. And guess what? That's not a temporary fix. That is a permanent change that we had in South Carolina by doing that. Another example, in our prison systems. I wanted to know how people got in, what happened to them when they were there, and what happened when they got out. So I went into men's prisons, I went into women's prisons, I went into maximum security prisons. I did all those things that my security did not want me to do. And at the end of it, we reformed our prison system. We did it. I started putting computer classes in there. We taught them how to build a resume. We did financial planning. We did family planning. We offered them faith-based help if they would take it. But we put equipment behind the fence, and we taught them a skill. Now in South Carolina, when someone leaves the fence, they've got a job to go to the next day. We have the lowest recidivism rate in the country. The goal isn't just to move money around, because then that doesn't always work. The goal reducing the size of government here and empowering people on the ground. That we're doing it in a way that informs and educates and allows them to become more effective and efficient. When you lift up the least of these, that's when magic happens. Another way that we would save money. When I became governor, and I will do the same thing as president, I wanted to control what I could control first. And the first thing you control as a leader is your agencies. So I went into every one of our agencies and I replaced the head of every single one, whether they were doing a good job or not, because I wanted to freshen it up and get them started. The second thing is I got on mission focus, because too many agencies were doing too many things that were not part of their mission. So I sent teams into every single agency to clean it up. Pull down regs, pull down old bills, get rid of problem children. In some cases, we tweaked agencies. In other cases, we gutted agencies. Then I gave them 90-day benchmarks. Bless you. They had to go and show a return on investment to the taxpayers. So every 90 days, they had to show my taxpayers what that agency was doing to make their life better. And then we saw that agencies were spending because they were worried they weren't going to get the same amount of money the next year. So I put all of their spending online for every taxpayer to see. And then I incentivized those agencies to start giving money back to the taxpayers. And magic happened, because the agencies started to compete on who could be the most effective and efficient. When I got done with that, then I turned to my legislature and I said, now it's your turn. I gave them a couple of bills that they could pass together that were easy, so they would remember what it was like to win again. And then I started giving them harder and harder things. The tone at the top matters. If the tone at the top is, how can you hold everybody accountable? How can you hold agencies accountable? How can you make sure they know that if you're costing a person or a business time, you're costing them money, and that's not acceptable? How do you make sure that you hold accountable people and you do all of those things? Then they know you mean business. I'll give you one more story. When I was at the United Nations, I'd been there my first week, drinking from a fire hydrant. And at the United Nations, there were about 130 people that worked at the U.S. mission for me. Many are like foreign service agents, diplomats. And the first week, someone gets on the phone with the press and tells them what I'm going to do. None of it was anything I said I was going to do. So I went and told my team, I said, go find out who this is, and I want them fired. You're never going to guess who it was. John Kerry's sister. John Kerry's sister. And they came back to me and they said, it's John Kerry's sister. I said, I don't care. I said, I want her fired. And they said, you can't. She's here for 6 more months. And I said, you take her pass, you take her computer, and I will pay her to sit at home for 6 months. She is not to walk back in this building. And she didn't. We never had another member of the staff pull anything like that. You have to hold people and agencies accountable. You have to set the tone yourself and do the work yourself to show what other people need to do. It's harder. It's more. But at the end of the day, that's what the taxpayers expect and deserve.
Time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Britt. I just want to say, to start off my question, I'm very excited as a young woman to be seeing a very strong, honest woman running for president. I'm very excited about that. The question is, what do you think your most important leadership trait is that you have?
Interesting. Because it's always hard to kind of think about how you are. I think that honestly, it goes back to how I was raised. So when I told you I was born and raised in that small rural town, we were the only Indian family in that small southern town. We weren't white enough to be white. We weren't black enough to be black. They didn't know who we were, what we were, or why we were there. And I remember when I would get teased on the playground. And my mom would always say, your job is not to show them how you're different. Your job is to show them how you're similar. And it's amazing how that lesson on the playground has played out throughout my life, whether it was the corporate world, whether it was governor or ambassador. Because when you're faced with a challenge, if you first talk about what you have in common, people let their guard down, and then you can take on the solution. And that's what I've always done. And I have always found the best leader is the one that doesn't decide who's good or who's bad, or who's right or who's wrong. The best leader is respects where everybody is and pulls out the best of them to get them to go to a place forward. And that's what I've always tried to do all my life, and that's what I will continue to try and do as your president. Thank you for taking the time to hang out with us tonight. You know, when I told you I ran against that longest serving legislator in South Carolina, people laughed at me. And I got to work, and I earned their support, and we won. When I ran for governor, I was actually the Tea Party candidate. I ran against a lieutenant governor, an attorney general, a very popular congressman, and a state senator. I was Nikki Who. I had 3% in the polls. I had the least amount of money. But I worked South Carolina like no one else, and we won. When I got to the United Nations, they said I didn't have enough experience. And I got to work and took the kick me sign off of our backs. I have been underestimated in everything I've ever done. And it's a blessing, because it makes me scrappy. No one will outwork me in this race. No one will outsmart me in this race. So if you like what I had to say today, go tell 10 people. Go tell 10 people that you heard me. Go tell 10 people that you want to do something. I know we have cards on your seats. Can I hold your card? You've got cards on your seats. If you are willing to caucus for me, I would forever be grateful and would fight every day to make you proud. If you want to volunteer, there's a spot for that here as well. If you had a question and you didn't get it asked, you put it on this card and we will send you an answer. But get involved. Be part of the solution. We can do this. If you don't like what I had to say today,